The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the marble foyer of the Metropolitan Arts Center, and the sound of designer heels clicked against polished floors like a metronome counting down to midnight. I stood at the velvet rope entrance, clutching my leather portfolio and watching as the city's elite glided past me in their $1,000 gowns and tailored tuxedos, heading into what should have been my night. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The annual Creative Excellence Gala. The event I'd conceptualized, designed, and single-handedly brought to life over 18 grueling months. Tonight, they would be celebrating the launch of Artisan Collective, the revolutionary platform that was supposed to change how independent artists connected with high-end buyers forever. Just as I approached the registration desk, Miranda Castellanos emerged from behind the red velvet curtain like a perfectly coiffed guardian angel of exclusion. Her smile was sharp enough to cut glass, and her clipboard was held like a shield between us. "Nicole, darling," she purred in. That practiced tone that wealthy people use when they're about to destroy your evening. "I'm afraid there's been a situation with the seating arrangements." I felt my stomach drop, but kept my expression neutral. "A situation?" She glanced down at her list with theatrical concern. "We're at absolute capacity tonight. Fire marshal's orders. You understand how these things work in the nonprofit world. Donors and board members take priority." I looked past her pristine shoulder. The ballroom was spacious, probably seated for 800, and I could see empty chairs scattered throughout. At the main table, directly in front of the stage, sat Marcus Wellington, the 26-year-old digital innovation specialist who had somehow become the face of my life's work. Marcus caught my eye through the doorway and raised his champagne flute in what could only be described as a victorious salute. The same intern who'd been hired 6 weeks ago to assist with platform integration was now being introduced to investors as the visionary architect behind Artisan Collective. "I'm sorry, but you'll need to wait in the lobby," Miranda continued, her voice dripping with manufactured sympathy. "We'll make sure to send you the presentation materials afterward." I said nothing. Instead, I stepped back from the registration table, found a quiet corner near the coat check, and opened my laptop. The venue's Wi-Fi connected immediately. The same network I'd helped design when we were planning the technical requirements for tonight's live demonstrations. I pulled up the email I'd drafted 3 days ago, when I first suspected this moment would come. My finger hovered over the send button as I scanned the subject line one final time: immediate activation of intellectual property rights, Artisan Collective Platform. Then I looked Miranda directly in the eyes and smiled. "You might want to check your email in about 30 seconds. I pressed send, and behind me, the first notification chimed on someone's phone. Then another. Within 60 seconds, the gentle buzz of conversation in the lobby had shifted to an urgent murmur. I closed my laptop, tucked it under my arm, and walked calmly toward the exit as the sound of confused voices began to spill out from the ballroom. By the time I reached my car, the CEO's number was already flashing on my screen. 5 years earlier, I'd arrived at Meridian Arts Foundation with nothing but a worn portfolio and an obsession with solving problems that everyone else had accepted as unsolvable. The foundation occupied a converted warehouse in Brooklyn's Dumbo district, all exposed brick and industrial lighting that was meant to look authentically creative, but mostly just made everyone squint. I was hired as a program development coordinator, which in nonprofit speak meant the person who does everything but gets credit for nothing. My official job description involved managing grant applications and coordinating workshops for local artists. What I actually did was rebuild their entire digital infrastructure from scratch. Within my first year, I designed a custom database that tracked artist submissions, streamlined their application process, and created automated reporting systems that cut administrative overhead by 60%. The foundation's quarterly reports started looking professional for the first time in their 12-year history, but the real breakthrough came when I was working late one evening, frustrated by watching talented artists struggle to connect with buyers who were desperately seeking authentic work. The traditional gallery system was broken, artists couldn't afford the overhead, buyers couldn't find what they wanted, and everyone was drowning in middleman fees. That's when I started sketching out what would eventually become Artisan Collective. The concept was elegant, a curated digital platform that combined the intimacy of a private gallery showing with the reach of e-commerce. Artists could showcase their work in immersive virtual environments, buyers could attend exclusive digital events, and the platform would handle everything from authentication to shipping to payment processing. But this wasn't just another online marketplace. I was designing something revolutionary: augmented reality previews that let buyers see how artwork would look in their actual spaces, AI-powered curation that matched pieces to buyer preferences, and a blockchain-based provenance system that eliminated forgery concerns forever. I spent 18 months building the prototype on my personal equipment, working nights and weekends, testing every feature until it was flawless. The platform could process real-time bidding during virtual auctions, generate detailed analytics for artists about their market reach, and even predict trending styles based on cultural data analysis. When I finally presented the concept to Dr. Elizabeth Hartman, the foundation's executive director, she sat in stunned silence for nearly 3 minutes. "This could change everything," she finally whispered. "How soon can we launch?" I'd expected enthusiasm, but I wasn't prepared for what came next. Within days, the foundation had hired a digital strategy consultant named Marcus Wellington, a recent MBA graduate whose father happened to sit on the board of directors. "Marcus will help you navigate the technical complexities," Dr. Hartman explained during our first three-way meeting. "His background in venture capital will be invaluable as we scale this project." I nodded politely, assuming this meant I'd have additional resources and support. I was wrong. Marcus had an MBA from Wharton and a trust fund from Connecticut, but he couldn't tell the difference between a database and a spreadsheet. Our first collaborative session involved me explaining basic concepts while he took notes and asked questions that revealed he'd never built anything more complex than a PowerPoint presentation. "So when you say API integration," he said during one particularly painful meeting, "you mean like connecting things?" But Marcus had something I didn't: connections. Within weeks, he was attending board meetings I wasn't invited to, presenting updates on his platform development, and networking with potential investors at events where I was somehow never included. The turning point came during a foundation staff meeting when Dr. Hartman announced the upcoming Gala. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. "We're thrilled to showcase Artisan Collective as our signature innovation," she said, beaming at Marcus. "This platform represents exactly the kind of forward-thinking approach our donors expect from us." I raised my hand. "I'd love to discuss the technical presentation. There are some features that really need to be demonstrated properly." Dr. Hartman's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Marcus will be handling the presentation. You've done excellent supporting work, Nicole, but we need someone with investor relations experience to represent the foundation at this level." Supporting work. 18 months of innovation, reduced to supporting work. That afternoon, I made 2 decisions. First, I started documenting everything, every line of code, every design decision, every timestamp that proved the platform's true origins. Second, I began building something they couldn't steal. What most people didn't understand about intellectual property law was that it wasn't just about who created something, it was about who could prove they created it, and who owned the rights to control it. I'd been naive during my first 3 years at the foundation. I'd built Artisan Collective using foundation resources, on foundation time, with foundation equipment. Technically, they owned whatever I created. But I'd also been careful. The core architecture, the revolutionary algorithms, the breakthrough innovations that made the platform actually work, those I'd developed independently. More importantly, I'd never signed a comprehensive intellectual property assignment agreement. The foundation's legal department was notoriously sloppy, and my original employment contract contained language that was vague enough to drive a truck through. Over the following months, I began preparing my insurance policy, working exclusively on my personal devices, using my home internet, and documenting every session with timestamped screen recordings. I rebuilt Artisan Collective's core systems from scratch. This wasn't the same platform the foundation thought they owned. This was something entirely new, built on proprietary algorithms I developed independently. I called it Genesis Protocol, a next-generation arts commerce platform that made the foundation's version look like a high school project. Genesis could do everything Artisan Collective did, but faster, smarter, and with features that wouldn't be possible for another 5 years using conventional approaches. The key innovation was what I called emotional commerce, machine learning. Algorithms that analyzed not just buying patterns, but emotional responses to art. The platform could predict which pieces would resonate with individual buyers based on subtle behavioral cues, creating an almost supernatural ability to match art with its perfect owner. But technology was only half the battle. I needed legal protection and market access. That's where Isabella Rodriguez came in. Isabella was an intellectual property attorney who specialized in tech sector disputes, and she had a reputation for being absolutely ruthless when defending her clients' interests. We met at a coffee shop in Manhattan, and I walked her through everything: the platform architecture, the development timeline, the foundation's attempts to erase my contributions. "They think they own you," she said after reviewing my documentation. "But they've made several critical errors. Your original contract doesn't include comprehensive IP assignment language. You developed the core innovations independently. And most importantly, they've created a public record of misrepresentation. She leaned forward, eyes gleaming with the anticipation of a legal battle. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to let them launch their version, let them make their claims, let them take their bows. Then we're going to activate your rights to the technology they're actually using, and watch their entire presentation collapse in real time. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. The Foundation's version of Artisan Collective was built on the framework I'd created using their resources. But the core protocols, the revolutionary features they were planning to demonstrate, those belonged to me, and I could prove it. More importantly, I could disable them remotely. I started with people the Foundation had discarded, brilliant minds who'd been pushed aside because they threatened someone's ego or didn't fit the organization's cultural vision. David Chen had been the Foundation's lead developer until he'd been quietly restructured out after suggesting that Marcus's technical understanding was fundamentally inadequate. David now ran cybersecurity consultations for galleries, but he'd never forgotten how his expertise had been dismissed in favor of political connections. Sarah Williams was a former curator who'd been pushed out after she'd questioned why certain exhibitions were receiving priority funding. She'd built an independent artist advocacy group that operated on a shoestring budget but had more credibility than institutions with million-dollar endowments. Then there was James Morrison, a gallery owner whose family had been in the art business for 3 generations. James understood something that most people missed: the art world wasn't really about art. It was about trust, relationships, and proving authenticity in a market where reputation was everything. We didn't meet as a group initially. Instead, I had individual conversations over coffee, drinks, or walks through gallery districts. I didn't pitch them a startup or promise them stock options. I asked them a simple question: what would you build if you could start over from scratch? Their answers were remarkably consistent. They wanted a platform that put artists first, that eliminated gatekeeping and politics, that used technology to enhance rather than replace human curation. They wanted something honest. When I showed them the Genesis protocol, their reactions ranged from excitement to disbelief. This actually works? Sarah asked, watching the platform's AI system analyze emotional responses to different artistic styles in real time. You can predict which pieces someone will love before they've even seen them. Better than that, I said. It learns from their reactions and gets more accurate over time. It's like having a personal curator who understands your taste better than you do. But I needed more than just a team. I needed funding and, more importantly, I needed artists who were willing to trust a completely new platform. That's where my secret weapon came in: the artists themselves. Over the past 3 years, I'd quietly built relationships with hundreds of artists who'd applied to Foundation programs. I'd helped them navigate the application process, provided technical support when their submissions weren't displaying properly, and often worked with them directly to improve their presentation materials. These weren't famous names or gallery darlings. They were working artists who were tired of being treated like products in someone else's business plan. When I reached out to them individually, explaining what I was building and asking if they'd be interested in being part of something completely different, the response was overwhelming. "You mean we'd actually own our work on this platform?" asked Maria Santos, a sculptor whose installations had been featured in Foundation exhibitions but who'd never seen a penny in direct sales. "More than that," I said. "You'd be partners. Every artist on Genesis Protocol gets equity in the platform itself. When we succeed, you succeed." Within 3 months, I had commitments from over 400 artists. Not contracts or binding agreements, just handshake promises that if I could build what I was promising, they'd give me first access to their work. The Foundation, meanwhile, was struggling with their version of Artisan Collective. Without access to my proprietary algorithms, their platform was slow, clunky, and couldn't deliver the seamless experience they'd promised investors. Marcus had hired a team of developers to reverse engineer my work, but they were essentially trying to recreate magic without understanding the underlying principles. Their version looked similar on the surface, but it couldn't perform the advanced functions that made the platform revolutionary. I watched their struggle with fascination. They had my interface designs, my user experience concepts, even my marketing language. But they didn't have the engine that made everything work, and they were too proud to admit they were in over their heads. That's when Dr. Hartman made the call that sealed their fate. "We need to launch at the Gala," she announced during a Foundation meeting I learned about through my remaining contacts inside the organization. "The board is expecting to see results, and we've already promised our major donors a demonstration of the platform's capabilities." The Gala was scheduled for 6 weeks away. They were going to attempt to publicly launch a platform that didn't actually work, using technology they didn't own, taking credit for innovations they couldn't reproduce. I began finalizing my preparations. Isabella had helped me register Genesis Protocol as a comprehensive intellectual property portfolio, including patents on the core algorithms, trademarks on the innovative features, and copyright protection for the user interface innovations. Everything was bulletproof, but I also needed to demonstrate that the Foundation's platform was built on technology they didn't have permission to use. That required a more sophisticated approach. Working with David, we embedded what we called authentication protocols into the original codebase I developed for the Foundation. These weren't malicious, they were simply verification systems that confirmed the legitimacy of the platform's core functions. If someone tried to use the advanced features without proper authorization, the authentication protocols would activate and require verification from the original developer. It was like having a car that would only start for the person who owned the keys. The Foundation's development team had no idea these protocols existed. They'd focused on the surface-level features, the pretty interfaces and basic functionality that made the platform look impressive during short demonstrations, but the revolutionary capabilities they were planning to showcase at the Gala, the real-time bidding system, the augmented reality previews, the AI-powered curation, those all relied on my proprietary algorithms. And those algorithms included authentication requirements. On the morning of the Gala, I sent a single email to the Foundation's technical team, Marcus, Dr. Hartman, and the board of directors. The message was simple: effective immediately, access to all Genesis protocol technologies is restricted pending resolution of intellectual property disputes. All unauthorized use of patented algorithms will result in immediate system lockdown. Attached to the email were copies of my patent filings, employment contract analysis, and a detailed technical report proving that the Foundation's version of Artisan Collective was entirely dependent on technology they didn't own. The email was timed to arrive exactly 30 minutes before the Gala's main presentation was scheduled to begin. I didn't attend the Gala, but I didn't need to. David had helped me set up monitoring systems that let me watch the entire disaster unfold from my apartment. The Foundation's presentation began normally. Marcus took the stage in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, smiled confidently at the audience of donors and investors, and began describing the revolutionary platform that was going to transform the art world. "Tonight, you'll witness the future of arts commerce," he announced to polite applause. Artisan Collective represents a breakthrough in how we connect artists with collectors, using cutting-edge technology to create unprecedented opportunities for creative professionals. He clicked to the first slide, showing the platform's sleek interface. Everything looked perfect. Then he attempted to demonstrate the AI-powered curation system. The screen froze for a moment, then displayed a message that made the entire ballroom fall silent. Authentication required. This feature requires authorization from the original developer. Please contact Genesis Protocol for access permissions. Marcus laughed nervously and clicked through to the next demonstration, the augmented reality preview system. The same message appeared, then the real-time bidding system. Same message. Within minutes, it became clear that every advanced feature of the platform was locked behind authentication requirements that Marcus couldn't satisfy. Dr. Hartman rushed to the stage to whisper frantically in Marcus's ear. I watched through the live stream as he pulled out his phone, presumably to check his email for the first time that evening. The color drained from his face as he read my message. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice cracking slightly, "we appear to be experiencing some technical difficulties. If you could just give us a moment." But by then, several board members had also checked their phones. The murmur of confused conversation was rising throughout the ballroom. That's when someone in the audience, I later learned it was a journalist from Art Forum who'd been invited to cover the launch, stood up and asked the question that brought everything crashing down. "Mr. Wellington, can you explain why your platform is displaying messages about Genesis Protocol and intellectual property disputes?" The next few minutes were excruciating to watch. Marcus attempted to deflect, Dr. Hartman tried to regain control of the narrative, and the Foundation's legal counsel, who'd apparently been blindsided by the entire situation, began making urgent phone calls from the back of the ballroom. Meanwhile, I was activating the second phase of my plan. While the Foundation struggled with their broken presentation, I was sending personal invitations to everyone in that ballroom, donors, investors, artists, journalists, introducing them to Genesis Protocol and offering them a private preview of a platform that actually worked. The contrast was devastating. While Marcus fumbled with lockdown features and authentication errors, I was demonstrating a fully functional platform that delivered everything Artisan Collective had promised and more. By the time the Foundation's Gala ended in complete disaster, I had 47 meeting requests from potential investors, 23 interview requests from journalists, and over 200 applications from artists who wanted to join Genesis Protocol immediately. Within 48 hours, 3 major donors had withdrawn their support from the Foundation. The board of directors called an emergency meeting and placed both Dr. Hartman and Marcus on administrative leave pending a full investigation, but the real victory came when Isabella's legal team filed formal ownership claims on all the intellectual property the foundation had been using without authorization. Their version of Artisan Collective wasn't just broken, it was built on stolen technology, and they couldn't fix it without paying licensing fees to me. Marcus's father tried to intervene, using his board position to pressure me into some kind of settlement. The conversation, which took place in Isabella's law office, lasted exactly 12 minutes. "Nicole," he said, leaning forward with the kind of paternalistic confidence that rich men use when they're accustomed to getting their way, "you're a smart girl, but you're in over your head here. These kinds of disputes can drag on for years and cost millions in legal fees. Wouldn't it be better for everyone if we could work out some kind of arrangement?" Isabella answered before I could speak. "Mr. Wellington, your son and your organization have been using my client's intellectual property without authorization for over a year. They've misrepresented ownership of her innovations to potential investors and attempted to exclude her from credit for her own work. We're not interested in arrangements." He shifted tactics, trying to appeal directly to me. "Look, nobody wants to destroy careers over a misunderstanding. Marcus is young, he made some mistakes, but he's learned from this experience. The foundation does important work in the community. Surely we can find a solution that works for everyone." I looked at him for a long moment, thinking about all the evening meetings I'd missed while building their platform, all the presentations I'd watched from the back of the room while Marcus took credit for my work, all the times I'd been told I wasn't quite ready for the spotlight. "Mr. Wellington," I said finally, "your son didn't make mistakes. He executed a deliberate strategy to steal credit for work he couldn't have done himself. And your foundation didn't misunderstand anything, they made calculated decisions to prioritize his connections over my contributions. There's no arrangement that fixes that." He stood up, his friendly facade finally cracking. "You're making a serious mistake, young lady. Do you have any idea how much influence this foundation has in the art world? You'll never work in this industry again." Isabella smiled pleasantly. "Actually, Mr. Wellington, she doesn't need to work in your industry. She's building her own." We'd secured series of funding from 3 different venture capital firms, including one that specifically focused on companies founded by women and underrepresented minorities. Our artist community had grown to over 1,200 creators, and we were processing more than $2 million in monthly transactions, but the real revolution wasn't in the numbers, it was in what we'd proven was possible. Genesis Protocol operated on a completely different model than traditional art platforms. Artists retained full ownership of their work, earned 85% of every sale, compared to 50 to 60% at traditional galleries, and received equity in the platform itself. Every quarterly profit share was distributed among our artist partners. Our augmented reality system had evolved beyond simple previews. Buyers could now experience full virtual gallery walks, attend live artist talks in immersive environments, and even collaborate with artists on custom pieces through shared digital workspaces. The emotional commerce algorithms had become so sophisticated that we were achieving a 94% satisfaction rate on recommendations, higher than any other platform in any industry. Artists were connecting with collectors who truly understood their work, creating relationships that lasted far beyond individual transactions. We'd also solved problems that the traditional art world had accepted as unsolvable. Our blockchain-based provenance system eliminated forgery concerns, our automated escrow services handled international transactions seamlessly, and our AI-powered market analysis helped artists price their work appropriately for the first time. The foundation, meanwhile, had quietly shuttered their Artisan Collective project. Dr. Hartman had resigned to pursue other opportunities, and Marcus had reportedly enrolled in a coding bootcamp, though rumors suggested his trust fund would keep him comfortable, regardless of whether he ever learned to actually build anything. But my favorite outcome was completely unexpected. 3 former Foundation board members had reached out individually, asking if they could invest in Genesis Protocol personally. When I asked why, their answers were remarkably similar. They'd finally seen what actual innovation looked like, and they wanted to be part of it. I was invited as the keynote speaker, not as a representative of any institution, but as the founder of Genesis Protocol. The auditorium was packed with gallery owners, museum directors, technology executives, and hundreds of artists who'd traveled from around the world to hear about what we were building. I stood at the podium, looking out at faces that had once dismissed me or never bothered to see me at all, and began with the line that had become our unofficial motto: "They told me I wasn't ready for the spotlight, so I built my own stage." The audience was quiet, attentive, and completely focused. For the next 45 minutes, I didn't talk about revenge or vindication. I talked about architecture, how we'd rebuilt the relationship between artists and the market, how technology could enhance rather than replace human creativity, and how the most powerful innovations come from people who refuse to accept that broken systems can't be fixed. I demonstrated Genesis Protocol's latest features: virtual reality exhibitions that let artists create impossible galleries, AI collaborators that could help artists explore new techniques, and a global marketplace that had eliminated geographical barriers for the first time in art history. But the moment that mattered most came during the Q&A session, when a young artist raised her hand and asked, "How do we know this platform won't just become another institution that eventually forgets about the artists who built it?" I smiled, thinking about all the equity agreements we'd signed, all the artist advisory positions we'd created, all the ways we'd built protection against our own success directly into our corporate structure. Because, I said, this time, the artists own the building. The applause that followed wasn't polite conference clapping. It was the sound of recognition, of possibility, of people who had been waiting their entire careers for someone to prove that things could actually be different. After the conference, I walked through downtown San Francisco as the sun was setting, thinking about how dramatically my life had changed since that night at the Metropolitan Arts Center. My phone buzzed with messages from artists, investors, and journalists who wanted to be part of what we were building, but the message that meant the most came from Maria Santos, the sculptor who'd been one of our first artist partners. She'd just sold her largest piece ever through Genesis Protocol, an installation that would be displayed in a collector's private museum, and the sale had changed her life. "Nicole," her message read, "I've been making art for 15 years, but this is the first time I felt like an artist instead of just someone hoping to be discovered. Thank you for building something that actually works for us." I stood on the corner of Market Street, reading her words as people streamed past me heading to restaurants and bars and whatever evening plans awaited them. For the first time in years, I felt something I'd almost forgotten: satisfaction, not the satisfaction of revenge, though that had been sweet in its own way. Not the satisfaction of success, though the Genesis Protocol was exceeding our wildest projections. This was something deeper, the satisfaction of having built something that mattered, something that made other people's lives better, something that would exist long after I moved on to whatever came next. I put my phone away and started walking toward my hotel, already thinking about the innovations we'd roll out next quarter, the artists we'd support next month, the problems we'd solve next year. Behind me, the conference center was emptying out as attendees headed off to networking events and dinner meetings. But I had everything I needed right here: a platform that worked, a team that believed in what we were building, and the absolute certainty that we were just getting started. That they'd tried to keep me outside the room where decisions were made. Instead, I'd built an entirely different room, one with better lighting, more comfortable chairs, and doors that opened for everyone. The platform, now operated in 47 countries, had facilitated over $50 million in artist sales, and had spawned an entire ecosystem of copycat platforms, most of which failed because they couldn't replicate our core innovation, treating artists as partners rather than products. But the development that surprised even me was how the Genesis Protocol had become a catalyst for change far beyond the art world. Netflix approached us about creating a documentary series called The Ownership Revolution. The 3-part series would explore how Genesis Protocol had inspired similar movements in music, writing, and even scientific research, industries where creators had traditionally been exploited by institutional middlemen. During the filming, I sat in our Brooklyn headquarters, a converted warehouse that now housed 127 employees and looked nothing like the sterile foundation offices where this all began, and reflected on something I hadn't anticipated. The platform was never really about art, I told the documentary crew. It was about proving that the people who create value should be the ones who control it. The series premiered 6 months later to critical acclaim, but more importantly, it sparked conversations in boardrooms, classrooms, and coffee shops about who really owns the work that drives our economy. The most surreal development came when Dr. Elizabeth Hartman reached out personally, requesting a private meeting. She'd left the foundation 2 years earlier and had spent the intervening time building a consulting practice that helped nonprofits avoid exactly the kind of institutional blindness that had destroyed her career. We met at the same Brooklyn coffee shop where I'd first outlined Genesis Protocol to Isabella, and her opening words caught me completely off guard. "I need to tell you something I should have said 3 years ago," she began, hands wrapped around her coffee cup like an anchor. "I knew Marcus was taking credit for your work. The board knew it too. We made a calculated decision that his connections were more valuable than your contributions, and we convinced ourselves that was just how these things worked." She paused, meeting my eyes directly for what felt like the first time in our entire professional relationship. "We were wrong. Not just strategically, though obviously that's been proven, but morally. You deserved better from us, and I'm sorry." I studied her face, looking for traces of the polished executive who had dismissed my concerns and excluded me from my own creation. What I saw instead was someone who had clearly spent considerable time thinking about the cost of her choices. "What do you want from me?" I asked, not unkindly but directly. "Nothing," she said. "I wanted you to know that what happened to you changed how I think about leadership. The consulting work I do now, I spend my time helping organizations recognize and credit the people who actually drive their success. It's not enough to make up for what we did to you, but it's something." She slid a business card across the table. "If you ever want to work together on reforming how nonprofits handle intellectual property and attribution, I'd be honored to contribute to something you're building. But I understand if you'd rather I just stay out of your way." I looked at the card, simple, elegant, with her name and a tagline that read, "Authentic Leadership Consulting." "I'll think about it," I said, and meant it.by year 3, something unexpected had emerged. Universities were reaching out to license our platform. Architecture for academic research. Graduate students and professors were using modified versions of our emotional commerce algorithms to study everything from consumer psychology to cultural anthropology. The most exciting partnership came from MIT, where a team of researchers had adapted our authentication protocols to create a system for academic publishing that ensured proper attribution for collaborative research. They called it Scholarly Genesis, and it was solving the same problems in academia that we'd addressed in the art world. Dr. Sarah Chen, the MIT professor leading the project, put it perfectly during our initial collaboration meeting. "Every industry has its Marcus Wellingtons, people who excel at taking credit for other people's innovations. What you've built isn't just a business model, it's a framework for institutional honesty." The phone call I never expected came on a Tuesday morning in October. A staff member from the House Committee on Small Business was inviting me to testify at a hearing on intellectual property rights and economic innovation. The hearing room was intimidating, wood-paneled walls, formal seating, and cameras capturing every word for C-SPAN. But as I sat at the witness table, looking out at representatives from both parties, I realized this was exactly where the conversation needed to happen. "Ms. Smith," said Representative Jennifer Walsh, the committee chair, "your company has demonstrated that protecting creator rights isn't just morally correct, it's economically efficient. Can you explain how this model could be applied more broadly?" I spent the next 20 minutes outlining how ownership transparency and creator equity could revolutionize everything from pharmaceutical research to software development. The questions that followed were surprisingly sophisticated, suggesting that at least some members of Congress understood we were discussing fundamental changes to how value creation and attribution work in the modern economy. The hearing led to bipartisan legislation strengthening intellectual property protections for individual creators, something I never imagined when I was building authentication protocols in my apartment. The moment that brought everything into focus happened during our 4th annual Genesis Protocol Artist Summit. We'd grown the event from a small gathering in our Brooklyn office to a 3-day conference that attracted over 2,000 artists, collectors, and industry professionals. On the final day, during the closing reception, I was approached by a young woman who looked familiar but whom I couldn't quite place. "Miss Smith," she said, extending her hand, "I'm Alex Rivera. I just graduated from Parsons, and I wanted to thank you." The name clicked. Alex had been one of the first artists to apply for our Emerging Creator Fellowship program. But what she said next surprised me. "I didn't just want to thank you for the fellowship," she continued. "I wanted to thank you for proving that things could be different. I spent 4 years in art school listening to professors tell us that exploitation was just part of the creative life, that we'd have to choose between artistic integrity and financial stability. You showed us that was a false choice." She gestured around the reception, where hundreds of artists were networking, celebrating sales, and discussing collaborative projects that would have been impossible under traditional gallery systems. "This isn't just a platform," she said. "It's proof that we can build better systems. And that's changed how I think about everything." As I watched Alex rejoin a group of other young artists who were planning a collective exhibition through Genesis Protocol, I realized something profound. We hadn't just built a successful business. We demonstrated that institutional exploitation wasn't inevitable, it was a choice. And people were choosing differently. Later that evening, after the last reception attendees had headed home and our team had finished cleaning up, I stood alone in the conference space we'd rented for the summit. The walls were covered with digital displays showing art from our platform, thousands of pieces created by artists who owned their work, controlled their sales, and shared in the success of the system that supported them. My phone buzzed with a text from Isabella, who had become not just my attorney but a close friend. "Saw the C-SPAN coverage of your testimony. Your parents would be proud." I smiled, thinking about how much had changed since that night at the Metropolitan Arts Center when Miranda Castellanos had told me to wait outside. I'd been angry then, hurt and determined to prove a point. But somewhere along the way, the mission had evolved from personal vindication to something much larger. Genesis Protocol was no longer just my platform, it belonged to every artist who'd contributed to its growth, every collector who'd supported emerging creators, every developer who'd improved its functionality. We'd built something that could survive and thrive without any single person, including me, and that, I realized, was the most revolutionary thing of all, creating a system so robust and fair that it didn't need heroes or villains to function. It just needed people who believed that those who create value should be the ones who control it. The future was full of possibilities, new industries to transform, new creators to empower, new ways to prove that exploitation wasn't a feature of capitalism but a bug that could be fixed with better code. I turned off the lights and headed home, already excited about what we'd build tomorrow. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.